When we observe human behavior, we operate on a baseline expectation of rationality. We assume that a person's actions reflect their overall assessment of the competing options available to them. Take a purely ordinary choice. Julie chooses a week in Paris over a week in Peoria, even though she knows Paris is significantly more expensive. She has simply evaluated the experiential benefits of Paris as outweighing the financial costs. Or consider Jimmy, who bypasses a bowl of dry, high-fiber cereal to eat a rich chocolate mousse. He knows the cereal is healthier, but he evaluates the taste of the dessert as the superior option for his current desires. Now look at Joseph. He chooses a specific path, even though he is convinced that the alternative is better, all things considered. He evaluates option A as superior, and then deliberately executes option B. This specific phenomenon, freely and intentionally acting contrary to your own better judgment, is known in philosophy as akrasia, or weakness of will. And for thousands of years, philosophers have viewed it with extreme skepticism. In the Protagoras, Socrates famously denied that weakness of will even exists, arguing that no one willingly operates against their own knowledge of what is best. The paradox is structural. If we are rational agents and our evaluations are the very tools we use to guide our actions, Joseph's deliberate choice to subvert his own master evaluation appears logically impossible. The mid-century moral philosopher R.M. Hare formalized this paradox into a framework known as extreme internalism. Extreme internalism is the position that an agent's evaluative judgments possess a necessary internal connection to their motivations and physical actions. This diagram illustrates the first formal link in Hare's logic. The primary function of making an evaluative judgment, thinking I ought to do X, is to guide conduct. Second, Hare argues that a judgment can only guide conduct if it entails a first-person imperative. It acts as a direct internal command, translating X is best into let me do X. Finally, assuming the agent has the physical and psychological capacity, sincerely assenting to that first-person command inevitably and immediately results in action. Under Hare's strict mechanical model, if an agent fails to act on their supposed best judgment, only two things could be true. Either they faced an irresistible physical or psychological compulsion, or they never genuinely held the evaluative judgment in the first place. Hare argues that when people act against what they claim is right, they are using ought in inverted commas. They are merely paying lip service to what society deems correct, without actually evaluating it as the superior choice themselves. But we know human flaws exist. We know we choose to sit on the couch instead of working. To prove that weakness of will is real, we have to shatter Hare's perfectly locked gear system and locate the exact structural gap between assessing a variable and executing an action. In 1970, philosopher Donald Davidson set out to prove that akrasia is illogically possible, without throwing out the concept of rational agency entirely. This diagram maps out Davidson's initial constraints. He starts with Principle 1. If an agent wants option A more than option B, they will intentionally do A. Principle 2 connects this to judgment. If an agent judges A is better than B, they will want A more. This creates a trap. Together, Principle 1 and Principle 2 seem to prove Hare's exact point, that an overall judgment strictly dictates action, leaving zero mathematical room for weakness of will. But Davidson noticed a loophole. Principle 1 and Principle 2 only apply to absolute, unconditional judgments. Instead, early deliberation relies on prima facie judgments. A prima facie judgment maps a single specific reason to a potential option. Because prima facie judgments are strictly relational, option A is better only in light of reason 1, they cannot be logically detached into absolute behavioral commands. This relational structure means an agent can hold dozens of competing prima facie judgments. You can acknowledge it is expensive, while simultaneously acknowledging it's fun, without committing a logical contradiction. To make progress toward an actual decision, an agent must eventually synthesize these scattered, single-variable judgments into a comprehensive evaluation. This visual maps the creation of the all things considered judgment. It is a comprehensive evaluation that takes the entire set of available reasons into account. Davidson compares this to the detective Hercule Poirot investigating a murder. Poirot can synthesize all the available evidence and realize the total weight of the testimony points to Colonel Mustard. But observing that the evidence points to Mustard is structurally distinct from the formal act of declaring him guilty. Here is the Akrasia loophole. The weak-willed agent reaches the all things considered judgment, but remains stuck, failing to make the leap to the detached all-out node. Davidson argues these agents are violating the principle of continence, a substantive rule of rationality requiring us to perform the action judged best on the basis of all available reasons. This explains why weakness of will feels inexplicable or absurd even to the person doing it. The agent has a reason for their suboptimal action, but by their own lights, they know it is an insufficient reason compared to the whole. Under Davidson's model, Akrasia is not a logical impossibility, it is a procedural rational defect. The agent hasn't contradicted themselves, they have simply failed to cross the gap between relational assessment and unconditional commitment. Davidson's model is elegant, but it contains a fatal limit. It only permits weakness of will if the agent never forms that final, unconditional conclusion. Philosopher Michael Bratman introduced a counterexample to break this logic, centering on a character we can call Sam the drinker. Sam is deeply depressed. He knows he has an early wake-up call and needs a clear head tomorrow. Looking at his situation, Sam explicitly and unconditionally concludes that it is best to abstain. But Sam pours the wine anyway. He has made the all-out judgment. He leapt across Davidson's structural gap, and still he acts against it. Cases like this sparked a modern academic debate. Traditionalists argue that agents like Sam are exhibiting severe practical irrationality, but dissenting theorists suggest that perhaps the agent's better judgment is simply flawed, missing vital empirical data that their instinct correctly picks up on. Regardless of who is right, Sam's case proves that Davidson's vertical point-in-time logic tree is insufficient. To understand weakness of will, we have to change the fundamental architecture of the problem. Philosopher Richard Holton proposed a fundamental reorientation of this problem. He argued that the philosophical tradition spent 2,000 years misdiagnosing the subject by looking at human evaluations frozen at a single moment in time. Holton moved the debate from a synchronic problem, evaluating choices in a single, static instant, to a diachronic problem, analyzing how agency functions across a span of time. Under this model, weakness of will is not acting against a present evaluative judgment. It is the failure to maintain a previously formed intention across time. This timeline illustrates a specific mechanism of agency required here, the resolution. A resolution is a contrary inclination defeating intention, a plan made specifically to insulate us against future temptations. We construct resolutions at time 1 precisely because we anticipate severe physiological or psychological friction arriving at time 2. True weakness of will is not a mere change of mind based on new evidence, but the structural collapse of this temporal scaffolding when the anticipated friction actually hits. Human agency is not a frictionless calculation of reasons. It is a fragile temporal architecture. Succeeding requires more than logical continence in the present. It requires fortified resolutions to survive the reality of the future.